And we are live. Welcome to the show, everyone. We are live at VodPod Media Studios. As always, I am your host, Maximo. Welcome to the Maximo Show. I use pronouns he, him, his, and we're having another terrific Tuesday because I'm here with my good friend, Natalie Torres-Haddad. Natalie, how are you doing this evening?
Oh, I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh my gosh, girl, it's been a pleasure. We just were talking about it. It's been about 3 years since I last seen you in person. We had a great talk with the last time you were here in Texas, but you're all over the place, girl. What are you up to these days?
Right now, getting ready for the holidays, I think, but still working for at least another couple weeks and enjoying the virtual media. So that's been really nice, not having to worry about the travel for now.
Yeah, girl. Well, you look great. You got a great setup. I see you got your holiday scarf. Happy holidays to everyone if you are celebrating and acknowledging the holiday season. If you're not, I'm with you as well. I've got the green on for the Grinch, and we've got Natalie over here with her red and white. So thank you so much for joining us. If you are joining us here at VodPod Media, make sure you are liking, commenting, subscribing, sharing this post. We're excited to be here because we're going to talk all things money with the financially savvy Latina. I got to ask you, girl, how did you get that name?
The short story version, I had written my first book, which was Financially Savvy in 20 Minutes. And I was at a conference and everyone kept on saying, "Oh, you're the financially savvy Latina," because my book name was so long. And it just kind of stuck throughout the 3 days of this conference. And I just thought that was so funny because I said, hey, I am Latina. I might as well own it. And just kind of since then, that was more than 10 years ago. So it's been a crazy ride for sure, but it's great to be able to represent too.
Yeah, great. So you're definitely representing up and down the highways. I've seen you at a lot of different conferences virtually. We know COVID has kind of threw us off from getting in person, but tell us a little bit for our audience and our viewers who don't know you just yet. You have an impressive resume, bio, a financial literacy expert. Tell us a little bit about yourself in your words. Introduce yourselves. I simply cannot do it justice, but to our audience that do not know you just yet, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, it's always an honor to be able to tell people what I've done because it's truly not just a team effort, but it's years in the making. And so it's been a couple of decades now doing the work that I do, which I'm actually a financial literacy educator. Most people don't even know what that means, but what it is basically I speak to large universities, conferences, organizations, 500 companies, and talking about teaching them financial literacy. With that, that's pretty much how I started my bread and butter. And then what I started doing was when I was teaching these workshops, I wrote a book. And the first book, which was written more than 10 years ago, became an award-winning book. And since then, I've written 5 other books, some collabs and some on my own, all around financial literacy, because that's really what I love and pretty much my purpose. And since then, we started a podcast, Financially Savvy in 20 Minutes, which is bilingual as well, because that's how I teach as well, being able to represent both languages. And we're going to celebrate our 7 years in a couple months, which is insane to think it's been that long that we've been podcasting. And from there, I've been doing a lot of now virtual media tours because, obviously we're still somewhat not traveling as much. And it's been kind of nice being home. But I miss being able to see people like you in person in other states. And I love to travel. So it's always nice to be doing that. Also, I've known a lot of people usually recognize me. I wasn't necessarily always in front of the camera or audio to say. But in 2018, I was offered my first TEDx talk, and I've done 2 since then, all around financial literacy. And so it's been definitely a journey, and I'm really appreciative that I've been able to have this type of platform, virtual and video and audio, anything and writing as well. So it's kind of my forte, and I throw in a little bit of mental health awareness because you and we've talked more about my issues and things that I've dealt with, and really the reality of most of my clients deal with some kind of difficulty, and especially now more than ever. So we'll get into that too, but in a nutshell, that's kind of what I do on a day-to-day basis.
Well, that's great. I mean, I know we talked a little bit about some of our mutual friends because, you've talked about yourself. I know I've read your bio. We talked about first generation. We've talked about, graduating from college and going out and really creating a name for yourself and carving your own niche into this world and putting a dent in the system, right, to give back to our communities. And that's all a part of the nature of our work, even what we're doing here at VodPod, creating media, having representation for people like ourselves, right? I mean, what was your calling like to get you involved in this financial sort of world, right? I mean, if growing up, most of the people I knew would say, hey, I don't like math, so I'm disqualified from anything regarding numbers, right? You, on the other hand, looked like you went in the opposite direction. Did you just have a niche and a calling to get involved with numbers and money and math?
For me, it was something that I was always interested in. Maybe because I was surrounded by different entrepreneurs, not just within my family, but my story really does resonate from what our culture has provided for us. What you're doing with this media, that's exactly what's amazing is we don't necessarily say, hey, I'm going to target this type of audience, but it turns out that people start to see themselves in you, right? So sometimes it does tend to, target to a specific maybe Latino market or whatever it might be. But for me, I've always been excited about just learning about how money works, how businesses work, how communities thrive, or unfortunately the opposite, right? I grew up in Inglewood, California too. So for a lot of people that don't really are familiar with that area, it's a very different place now than it was when I grew up. And I always tell people I grew up not just necessarily in a neighborhood that was completely of poverty, but mostly immigrant. My family and I, we are actually from El Salvador. I'm an immigrant refugee. Most of my family fled during the Civil War. And, being raised in LA where it just is amazing melting pot, it's also this difficulty of trying to understand why there is inequality. I live a few cities away from one of the richest cities in California. And yet I think it's so discerning and disappointing that we just don't have the same resources. And so from a very early age, I started to notice that. And my degrees are in finance, international business as my second degree, and my master's in public administration. So I've always been, and still am, a student. I'm always trying to learn. The markets are always changing. Partly what I tell people when I'm teaching is I'm also by experience. I tell my mistakes. I tell what's worked for me. I let them know what's worked for me when I invest. I tell them what hasn't worked for me. And I've been through now 3 recessions, and now we're turning into this next one that I've been talking about for the past 2 years. It's all because it's partly education and experience that comes with it. So I never thought I was, and when you're curious, you learn a little bit more. And I always talk about this as a language, right? So you learn some new words, you learn some new terms, and then you start really being fascinated by something else. And so that's kind of how I approach it. And I let people know you don't have to be smart at it. You don't have to know anything. Just start today because it makes the difference for tomorrow.
Yeah, and certainly these are issues that our community has to get literate with, right? Because the opposite of literate is illiterate. And in today's day and age, I mean, there's so much at stake, right? We talk about voting, right? Voting season just ended. There are some states we know in Georgia that's having a runoff because dollars and the votes seem to be what fuel and drive this country. So our community's got to get hip and got to get savvy to money issues, right? And for better or for worse, right? I mean, I'm one of the biggest critics of capitalism that there is. Everybody that knows me, I'll tell you all up and down, hey, our money's fake. The system's rigged, right? I mean, that's the sentiment with some of the people in our communities, right? So when you walk into a room, you talked about speaking at some of these universities. I mean, what is your pitch to get people to say, okay, I'm going to listen now to, this story about how to become financially savvy?
It's funny you say that because I think we have that conversation all the time in our home. It's like, you have to look at what other countries are doing as well, what they've been doing well for a very long time, and the things that they aren't, right? And I think it's naive to think that we have all the answers and that this is the greatest country. Yes, I think this country has a lot more benefits than others, but I think there's always room for improvement. And when I'm talking at these universities, for example, I did this keynote for UC Berkeley, and it was one of my dream schools that I couldn't get into back in the day. And it was to be at it was called the Financially and Economic Conference that they have every year, talking to them about look, there is not only discrepancies that are happening every day and injustices, but we don't have enough resources to be able to have a basic life, right? Having a basic income, having basic resources that will help us have a healthy and normal life. And because of that, I think when I talk to these universities, I'm talking to students, faculty, people that are staffed at these universities. I think one of the biggest takeaways that they always tell me is, they think that they feel like they're drowning in their debt, or they feel like they can never get past a certain amount of threshold that they want to get paid. But it's understanding that, okay, they just learned something new today. And I think sometimes we tend to think that we have to know everything today, or we have to be fluent, and I said fluent in the foreign language of financial literacy, but not really. It's just, how can I start today to improve some of the things that, maybe you have bad credit, maybe you don't know that you don't have any credit. How can you improve that and make yourself more leverage when you are asking for loans, when you are asking, for the right job, right? They look at all these different things that tends to unfortunately hold back a lot of Black and brown communities, right? A lot of them don't necessarily know, or they're taught. I mean, I was one of those, but they're taught not to have any debt. Well, there's good and bad debt, right? And so, should I get a little into it? Because the good and the bad debt is, this is a thing. If you have debt, nobody wants debt. I get that. But if you have debt, make sure it's good debt. So good debt is basically, a lender can be looking at your credit score and say, okay, this person has debt, but it's good debt, meaning they might have a student loan, maybe they have a mortgage, maybe they own a car, maybe not completely fried out, but it's a way to say, okay, they've invested in themselves, they invested in education in hopes to make more money, right? As opposed to when you look at bad debt, which is credit card debt, they can't distinguish what that credit card was for. Whether you're paying your utilities with it, whether you're paying for education with it, they can't distinguish that. So as a lender, they look at the lending and say, that's not the person that we want to, provide that money to. So I always feel like, not just particularly for Black and brown communities, we need to get the message that it's okay to have some credit card, some type of line of credit, because that also will help us build our credit score to be at the excellent level it needs to be, in order to get some amazing interest rates, as opposed to the worst predatory lending that I've seen these past few years.
Yeah, and a lot of our people have been victims to that predatory lending as well. I mean, let's be honest, if you're first generation college student, you're out here on your own, you're trying to navigate spaces that, historically haven't been for you. And again, it's not just Black and brown. We're talking about all sorts of people who may be first generation. You take out a credit card, right? You think you're doing the right thing. You start spending to, pay for groceries, and, who knows what the story may be. But that shouldn't have to hold you back, right? So there are resources out there for people to repair credit, to, look at ways to, rectify certain situations they've had in the past with credit cards or student loans even. Those are resources that you talk about regularly. So really quickly, let's just open it up that can, right? If somebody is, listening, or if somebody knows somebody who has, bad credit, where can they start? Give us 3 tips, or where can they go right now to start, turning that ship around?
Yeah, this is the best time to do it, before the end of the year. If you've never pulled out your credit score, or your report to say, that's something you can do, and it's free, right? And I know a lot of credit card companies, your bank also provides you a glimpse of what they call your credit report, to see where you stand, right? And so there's 3 different bureaus, right? So each bureau basically gives you an average number, and lets you know where you stand. So this is how I explain it to my students. Think of your credit score as grades, right? There's a difference between an A student and an F student, right? The A student is probably understanding the concepts, they're applying it well, they're excelling in that area. The F student is probably not doing the homework, not doing the work, and possibly obviously falling behind, right? And so with your credit score, you want to have a high credit score, right? Which is high 700s, 800 if possible. What we consider when it's riskier loans, or someone's going to give you a loan, anything under 600, anything under that is very risky, meaning they're going to give you the highest interest rate. And so I tell people, you want to be the A student as opposed to the F student. And here's a big thing that I want people to understand while they're watching this with us. They're probably feeling like, shoot, my credit score is bad. I don't know if we can curse on this, but my credit score is bad, and I don't know what to do. And, what's the point, right? And the reason I tell them is like, look, I don't want you to ever think that your credit score is you, right? That's not your worth. That's not who you are. However, your credit score can really help you identify where you are in your life financially. And so I always give the example of me when I went through a lot of financial turmoil, because I was dealing with my own life turmoil. So sometimes people are losing, I call it the 4 Ds. You're either dealing with debt, death, a disease, or divorce. And so those four areas can leave you in financial ruin. And sometimes it affects everything from thinking rationally. Unfortunately, you start making purchases that probably aren't the best for you. You hear often people say retail therapy. Guess what? That's not real therapy. You're avoiding whatever it is. So understanding that if you don't know what to do with your credit score now, don't even know if you have it, get those reports and see where you stand. So it's just like you're working out. You need to step on the scale, find out where you are. If okay, you need to lose a few pounds or whatever it is that you need to do, at least you know where you're starting from. Same thing with your credit report. Then you can also see if there's anyone using your report, right, your credit. So maybe you have identity theft and had no idea that someone is using your name, which is very common. And so I think it's really important to keep an eye on that. If you can't do it regularly, at least once a year.
Yeah. So you're touching on some good subjects right now. So as she mentioned, Natalie speaks frequently around the country. If you're watching this right now, you've got a built-in conference that you could hire us all and we could live stream it right at your university. Get with us. We've got a great topic and subject, which is financial literacy. Make sure you're following her on social media, Fin Savvy Latina on Instagram for all of these tips and more. And also subscribe to her podcast, which is Financially Savvy in 20
minutes. Yep.
Financially Savvy in 20 minutes.
20 minutes.
Throw it in the search bar. You'll find it. But you're touching on some good subjects. And there's another one I want to get to, and that's coming up in a couple of days. It's the Latina Equal Pay Day that I know you know a little bit about. And this is still a travesty that we have to talk about these things in a way where women of color, Black, brown, and Native communities are still severely underpaid. Right. And so tell me a little bit about this day, your involvement and what you may know and how we can, again, turn this around.
Yeah, for me, it's been about 10 years that I've been advocating about this. It's really unfortunate that we understand the statistics are there where women tend to make less than men. But when you start to really look at the demographics based on race, based on culture, right, you see that Latinas, unfortunately, are still making the least amount. And so every year, the date tends to change. This year happens to be December 8th, right? And so what that means is it would take a Latina to work those extra few months up until December 8th just to make the same amount that their white male counterpart. And most people don't understand too that women, yes, make less, but Black and brown women, specifically Latina, make less than 26% from white women. So even though we've seen some progress, we see that there is change within organizations that are now hiring more women. There's a little bit more diversity. We understand that. It still doesn't mean that the equal pay is still a part of that. And for me, it's because I've dealt with that myself. And I've also seen so many women still struggle with it. And I think it's great that now we're seeing a little bit more advocacy around it. But it's important to know that your state has these reports too, right? So every year, they come out with a report to show you by not only industry, by demographic, how much a person is actually earning. And so for women, I think it's really important to get educated on that. And the truth is, it affects everyone, right? How many people have I come across that they're like, oh yeah, I was raised by my single mom. Guess what? That single mom is taking care of all the kids. They're investing in their community. They're investing in their businesses if they have one, right? And so it's really something that once we start really actually being about it, saying that all women and men should be paid the same, this is something that I look forward to never having to talk again. But until then, I will definitely be advocating for it because it's still unfair when you see that we are dealing with so many different already situations and challenges within our communities and then not getting paid enough for it as well.
Yeah, you touched on a good word, and that was unfair. And that's what this comes down to is fairness. I'm involved in a lot of different circles, and many people believe that, if you come from communities of color, if you somehow trend towards the left on your political stances and leanings, that everyone's out here crying and asking for help. Now, that's not the case. The case is the deck's been stacked against many of our people for a lot of years in this country. And so there should be no reason that our people have to work so hard and still make so little. As you talked about, single moms, whether you work in 2 or 3 jobs to put food on the table, a lot of our communities got to work really hard. Now, look, as you know, right now, the value of the dollar is down, right? The cost of living is up, right? Let's talk about, what our communities can do right now to save more money. I mean, it's the holiday season. People typically tend to spend more money. Those that are at the top, right, of the financial spectrum, they're not concerned, about, well, I guess you would say a decreasing middle class that has been pushed down to the bottom, right? We talked about, maybe when we were in college, we thought maybe, hey, a $60,000 a year job right out of college would be a good living. Well, today, I don't know. Now, again, people have different circumstances with how they're living, but when you talk about all the things that we talked about, right? Home, car, cell phone, groceries, right? Student loans, all of these things, daycare bills. How are our families, all of these families surviving right now in this economy?
You just said it. They're trying to survive, right? So, unfortunately, we live in a time where everyone's trying to keep up with the Kardashians, right? Everyone's trying to look the part, and with inflation, with maybe if you've had a job loss or some form of income loss, it's affecting people on a real basis. And we need to obviously address those things, because if we're constantly coming from a survival mode, that means a sacrifice mode, then we never really have the mindset of there's abundance, right? Or that these things are available to us. I think also, which is really difficult to grasp for a lot of people, is, okay, what do I need to change that I'm not repeating the same thing my parents have gone through, right? Because many of us do have generational trauma, not just because we happen to be immigrants, or it could be as simple as, I always tell people, like, who do you remember in your home paying their bills? Like, how did they pay their bills? Were they excited? Did they have you sit down with them? Did they, go over what they were doing? Did they involve you in the process? Was it like a great feeling after you were done, or was it complete opposite of anxiety, frustration, the lack of not having enough, right? And so unfortunately, that does translate to us. And when we start paying our bills, the way we handle our money, it really does. It's a triple effect. So I think one of the things is understanding, what is your trauma? Just kind of figure out what your money story is, right? Where is it that how do you spend your money? And especially right now during this time of inflation, we're going to see our rates go up in the next couple of weeks even more. Next year is going to be, I'm not, everyone says I'm Chicken Little, but I don't care. I'm keeping it real. I always say, keep an eye on what's going on in the market. Within the next year, we're going to see a lot more difficulties occurring, that this is a real recession, and people are still kind of like, oh, it's not going to be as bad as 2008, or it's not going to be bad as, the dot-coms or whatever, if you were around that time during those recessions. But the truth is, there's a lot of things that tend to trickle over from the previous, not just administration, but really it's what our parents have failed to not been able to teach us, because they don't exactly having to deal with the same thing we have. Most of our parents never dealt with credit cards. I know our generation was the first to be targeted with credit cards on campus at universities. They could stand outside your door, get you on this credit card that was the worst interest rate for like 18-20%, for you to get a free, free shirt or a free gym membership for a month.
Yeah,
it's ridiculous.
I really needed that white t-shirt.
Yeah. And so now, luckily, it's against the law in most, pretty much throughout the country, in most states, that you can't even set foot on these universities. However, it doesn't mean that they're not getting access virtually, getting promotions. And so we're obviously trying to deal with trying to balance everything out. But for people, I always tell, right now with the holiday season, going back to that question, what is it that you can do to cut down and be real with yourself and with your loved ones, saying, hey, you know what? I have a real budget. I always have a budget for the holidays. What is it? And I say, make 3 lists. 1, what is it that you're going to make with your hands? Maybe you're going to create or have fun with your nieces and nephews and do something crafty with them. What is it you're going to bake? Maybe you're going to make a few dishes that, it's a lot inexpensive, and most people love. Maybe you have a special dish that people like. And then the last one is, what is it you're actually going to buy, whether it's a gift card, whether it's something that you need to provide all those gifts. And so that helps you cut down your list big time. And then I think it's really important to be real with yourself, keeping receipts for this year's holiday expenses. That way next year you have a real idea of how much you actually spent in December. There's a great report that shows you what consumers spend in the holiday season. It's one of the most expensive months, December. Doesn't matter if you do not even celebrate it, if you're going to potlucks, if you're going to networking events, if you're going to end of the year galas, anything that you have going on, this is one of the most expensive months. So how is it that you can prepare next year and say, okay, I need to have a real budget for that, or I need to cut scale on certain things. That way the months prior, I'm, whatever it is that you need to do to save a little bit more money. But I tell people, don't worry about buying people gifts if you don't even have an emergency fund for yourself, because no one's going to come and rescue you if you can't rescue yourself.
Girl, emergency funds. We're saving up for the water bill. What you talking about? And so that's what I'm talking about. You see, so like, do the majority, I would say, and you're the expert on this, so please fill me in. I
Yeah.
would say the majority of our people do not have like a financial advisor, someone who is advising us on if these purchases are wise, what's our monthly budget, if I'm not making ends meet right now, do I need to consider putting myself out there? Do I need to get a second, a third job? I mean, are we going, what is, I mean, this is, I know I'm asking you, I'm hitting you with
No,
like the
it's
iceberg at the Titanic right now. But I mean,
I know.
these are questions that our communities really don't know. How do we leverage, right? How do we go to our supervisor and say, look, I need to be making more money, right? What's that conversation even look like?
So the first thing is, I think there's a misconception that you have to have a wealth manager or an advisor, right? Ideally, it'd be great if you do, but if you don't, it's not the end of the world. Most people don't, and that's okay. However, you need to understand that you need to be held accountable for what you're spending, right? And the truth is, you said a lot of people don't have an emergency fund. It's most people don't even have $400 in case something were to happen, right? That they live paycheck to paycheck, and I get that, and I mean because I've been there, I totally understand that. But this is something that also needs to change. When we look at someone and when I meet with someone and they're like, oh, here's my budget. This is, my necessities and my luxuries, I call it, right? I'm like, okay, where can you cut back some of these luxuries? And it's funny because it all depends on your values too, right? Everyone has a different thing. Like for me, I prefer streaming online to watch something as opposed to maybe, spending money somewhere else or entertainment. It's a lot less expensive and safer right now, right? But for someone else, they're like, I can't even afford that. But you know what? They're using takeout food all the time. They're, getting Postmates, Uber, whatever it is that they're spending on a daily basis. They don't know that actually adds up. So kind of looking at what your necessities and luxuries are, not only cutting back. And I know I hate the word budget because everyone thinks of the word diet or they think of like limitations. But the truth is, can you think of what your bad habits are? Look at it like, okay, my healthy financial habits as opposed to my bad ones. And for those that are just like, well, am living paycheck to paycheck. I'm already cutting, enough to just pay, like you say, pay the electric bill, pay these things. Okay, so can you save $1 a day? Can you save, and you're like, $1 is nothing. It's more of a mindset. It's more of a habit that you start forming. When you pay for something, are you paying with credit card or are you paying with cash? For me, I love paying with credit card because I get points and I get that. However, I know some people that they can't pay with credit card because they will overspend. So for them, they go somewhere with cash on hand to help them, right? And I'm not saying always do cash or just always do credit card, but if you happen to know what your discipline is at this point, just to try to save some money, really have a real talk with yourself and say, you know what, this is all I can spend for food this month, right? Whether it's actual groceries, me taking the time of, sitting down, making a meal plan, which will save you money, or doing a potluck with your friends. Talk to your family members, your loved ones. And I know for especially Latinos, they don't talk about money for nothing, right? This is why I do what I do and what I love what I do, because now more and more people are talking about their money, their finances. When I started, there was hardly any brown women talking about this. And so one of the things I would say is, how can you have this conversation with your family? And I'm talking about the people closest to you, right? So the people that you deal on a daily basis. So it could be your parents, whoever you're going to be taking care of in the future, right? And sit down and be like, hey, what do you have? Do you have an emergency fund? What bills are you dealing with? This is what I'm dealing with. Because everyone's dealing with something, right? Someone might be going through some type of maybe cancer treatment or, paying student debt, or, they just lost a job. Well, having these awkward conversations can really help alleviate some of that depression, some of that frustration, but also just kind of sit down and be like, what can we do to help each other, right? And not necessarily has to be financial, but maybe it's just hearing you talk, right? Do you have a therapist? Hello, I cannot talk more about this I don't know. I wish
Yeah.
I have to start wearing it out, but I tell people, do you have someone that you can talk to about what you're going through? Because we tend to make irrational decisions when we're going through some difficult times. And so we spend more during that time too. And if someone is thinking, well, I don't know if I can ever save enough to have an emergency fund. Well, can you save enough to have a week taken care of? Like if you're out of work, if you're sick, do you have that? Do you have that for yourself? So just start small and it'll snowball into something bigger. And I think sometimes it's just figuring out what your bad habits are and then implementing those healthy financial habits to be like, oh yeah, it makes a difference. I remember when looking at my bank account when I had negative $800, and I'm like, how is this possible? And looking now, and it's like, what a difference. And it's all it was is me also tracking how much I was spending and be like, okay, a dollar here makes the difference. And it started to, multiply. And then it allows you to invest. It allows you to make other options that a lot of people aren't necessarily, and invest in the right thing. So that's a whole nother spiel. But you and I, as we're talking this, anyone that's watching this, I'm not your CPA. I am not your CFP. I highly recommend you to talk to them because everyone's on an individual basis. But I love educating people on certain things that they can start doing now and looking into for themselves.
Yeah, so we're not telling everybody go out and spend money on the lottery, right? The lotto. I remember when I was coming up, my grandfather had a large pad playing all these numbers on the pad and going out there and trying to hit the lotto, right? And watching it at 7 p.m. to watch the numbers come out and see if he hit the lotto. That was the big deal, back then. And again, times are different, right? But like we talked about, our community's got their things that they spend money on, right? That they value.
Yes.
Right? I know people that spend a lot of money on clothes. Like no matter what it is, they're going to spend their money on clothes. I know other people that spend their money on like self-care, right? They go to the spa, they go to get their nails done. They spend top dollar on that and they don't spend money on other things. Me, I spend money on food. You talked about food budget. I'm the dude, I'll go to the grocery store and I spend the top dollar on the prime steaks. Even though the select chops are right there, I could just easily get those for a little bit more that would last. I'm the type of dude that likes to invest in what I put into my body that helps me with my goals and how I feel and my output. So I think that's a part of it too. Your value system. What do you value? How do you spend your time and your money on? And where you talked about entertainment, right? How do people, spend their time there as well, right?
Yeah. And I like how you said that because it's true. Everybody has their own preferences. But I think sometimes people fail to look and be like, okay, I like how you admit you like food. And I understand. I'm the same way. I'm like, I prefer organic over GMO for sure. And so that means I'm going to pay more on that. Right. But I think sometimes people forget that there's alternatives to things, right? So like you said, clothes, absolutely. Especially, unfortunately, women get targeted the most with, expensive shoes, handbags, things that honestly I don't invest in myself because they're not investments. They're really just liabilities that you're spending money on. And so can you go to a thrift store? Can you do a swap, right? I tell people like swap parties are huge in Europe, not necessarily as much here anymore, or ever was, but it's, with some of your friends, okay, some of you have a sweater that maybe you can swap and say, hey, I wore it enough times, or maybe it didn't fit or it's brand new. And it happens all the time. People have new clothes in their closets all the time, right? So that's another way of trying to figure out how can I save money instead of spending money on clothes that I might only wear a couple times. And if you have a group of friends that you can do that or search, because now you could do anything online, right? Finding another group of people that have maybe your style, that like a certain brand, but also just kind of really figure it, okay, is it really worth spending money on these pair of shoes as opposed to using that money towards starting a 401k, starting something that's going to help you in the long run. And in the beginning, it's a lot about sacrifice. And I always tell people that it's never easy for me too. I remember in my 20s, I was saving money when I'd go out, especially when you're networking for work, going to happy hour or whatever it is. I had a limit and I'm like, I can't spend this much money on food or drinks. This is my max for the night because I need to save that money for a down payment on my home someday. And there was times when I'd see my friends, spending $100, a couple $100 on a night. And for me, it was like $20. So I make sure I'd eat at home. I, maybe get those $2 tacos, whatever it is. But it felt like a sacrifice those first few years. But in the long run, later down, I was like, I'm so glad I did that because I had that option to be able to purchase something. And I think right now, this is a big hot topic of the way real estate is going is what is it you've been doing or what is it that you're going to do moving forward? Because it does catch up on you, right? And depending on your values or your lifestyle, how is it that you can cut back? How is it that you can alternate and just have different options? But I think it's going back to, is it really worth this now as opposed to what will be in the few years to come?
Yeah, you touching on some good subjects. We're going to take a quick pause for the cause to give a couple of shout outs. We got to shout out Amzai Austin, who just walked into the building here at VodPod Media. His show's coming up at 8:30 Central, the Sam Pluto Show. Make sure you subscribe in here to VodPod Media, this channel. Sharon, big shout out to Natalie Torres, who is calling in from where tonight? Where you calling
me?
in from? Yeah.
I was like, Mija, I'm actually in from Los Angeles, so
She's
I love
calling in
all
from
my
Los
Texas people.
Angeles. Shout out California to Texas. You know, there's a highway. We got our people all here in the Southwest, all parts of the continental United States. Our people have been here for generations, and we ain't going anywhere yet. Big shout out to whoever did your painting and your art piece back there. That looks really nice. I want to hear a little bit more about your husband's comedy work because I hear he's funny. I want to hear his type. I'm a student of comedic humor, and I love them all. And I also got to give a shout out to whomever's watching this season and who may be struggling with where you may be at. Because Natalie, you talked about this a little bit about the importance of mental health, right? And mental health is, we are big believers in strong mental mind, body, and spirit. But our people are dealing with generational trauma. We're dealing with pain. We're dealing with things that we've experienced from previous generations. And that also leads us to how well we do financially. As you mentioned, generational wealth is a conversation that has been started up maybe just, I don't know, in the last 15, 20 years, big in our community. But as you alluded to earlier, you know, how we feel will dictate how we spend and how we treat others, right? It's all interrelated.
Yes. Yes. It's funny because it doesn't go away either, at least not overnight. It takes time, and that's what it is. That's what trauma is. It can come up out of nowhere, or it can, repeat itself if you don't learn from the first time around. And so it's learning to find some of those coping tools. And that's why I'm a big fan of therapy. I've been in therapy for more than 10 years now. But it's finding ways to what makes you feel good about yourself, right? What's that mental health, and eating well, exercising, talking to someone, talking to a friend. And I think within our community, that's something that we need to talk about. And then also find a creative outlet. And it's funny when you said, my husband's been doing comedy now for almost a year. And he's been doing amazing. Like, he's been at the Comedy Store many times, at Hollywood Improv. I mean, these are huge, iconic places, right? Places where like Eddie Murphy, Dave Chappelle, like people that you just like, I can't believe he's on the stage of the same place, right? But the funny thing is, and this is why I'm so like in awe of what he's doing, is he has always wanted to do this. And he does have a background in being able to speak in front of a large group, but it's been wonderful to see that he found a new outlet to do that. And it's something that is just something fun for him. It's also something that allows him to use some of his skills and tell his story. And it's therapeutic as well. So many of us have gone through so much during this pandemic, and representation matters. I always feel like he might be the token brown guy at most of these shows. But it's wonderful because I think that's why he's doing so well, because people get to see these different perspectives, as opposed to the same white guy telling the same jokes. And so it's always kind of great to see the dynamics of that. And my husband being Arabic and I'm Latina, it's kind of funny that, how these different worlds tend to work together, right? And so I think when just kind of going back to like how do we deal with this trauma? How do we deal with our mental health? Find a creative outlet, find something that you wanted to do, enjoy. And it doesn't matter what age you are, right? He's 40 starting this out, this somewhat of a new career added on. and it's kind of great to be able to see people being able to do something like that, because sometimes I think you hear people say, oh, I'm too old for that, or I'm too young to try this, or whatever it is. I think they're fun excuses, but in the end, you're robbing yourself from being able to be happier. When you're happier, you make better decisions, right? And so I always tell people, it's like, how is your mental health? Because if your mental health is struggling, guess what? Your financial health is probably struggling as well. They coincide with each other, that you just can't have one without the other. If you're sick, most likely you're going to spend more because you need medications, you need doctor visits, all these things. So it's really taking account of how do you take care of yourself? And I know that's really difficult. I know you used the word self-care. There's different ways to do self-care as well, but how is it that you're doing that the best? Because you can't show up for the people if you can't even show up for yourself. And I tested, I've had days where it's really difficult dealing with the stuff we've been dealing with those past few years. But guess what? I reach out for help. I figure out, okay, these are the tools that have helped me in the past. Let me use those. And then I also seek out new resources and new outlets to help me kind of, figure that out. And that's kind of how we started a podcast 7 years ago was, I wanted to be able to provide what you just said. People need this information, but they don't get it they don't have a wealth manager. Well, guess what? I wanted to provide it on all these platforms that you can get your podcast from. but I also wanted it to have it be bilingual. So then you could talk to your tia or someone about it. And turns out it's not even just Latinos listening to it. You know, we get messages from people all over the world saying, oh, yeah, listening to your podcast because our kids are learning Spanish. And it's like, it's such a great thing to know that representation just doesn't matter, but it's actually also making a difference on how we speak to our kids and the next generations to come.
Yeah, this is great information, Natalie. And we also got to give a shout out to Gylan Jackson, our producer tonight, who went extra squeaky clean on this live stream. He hooked up this screen, as you can see, live from Los Angeles. Gylan, what are they going to do when they watch the playback? It won't be live anymore. And I love being live, Natalie, too, by the way. We like to have real fun out here. And we also got to give you a special shout out for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us because, as you mentioned, with representation, you know, one of the things about our show, we're about 47 shows deep. We've been shooting all this year. We went hard. We said we're going to lean in on this because we wanted to have positive, real, authentic people like yourself to be out here represented. Look, we've never went TMZ. We've never went gossip and chisme and drama and stories and lies and BS. We never did any of that. We stayed true to ourselves and we said we're going to put authentic conversations out there about real issues that matter, like financial literacy. We're going to stay true to our mission about redefining the art of purposeful conversation, which is what we're doing right here. So if you're watching, we appreciate you. Go ahead and give us a share. Natalie, I want to hear, I got a kind of a deep question for you as well, because when you're doing this work, I can sense the passion that you have for it, right? It rolls off the tongue, right? It's not disingenuous. It's not something that you're trying to force here. Why do you do this work? Because you could be doing anything, right? I mean, you're a very intelligent person. You understand these complicated subjects, right? That most of our communities just said, I'm not even going to pay attention to this stuff, right? I'm going to go get involved in other things, Why do you do this work? Why do you get up every day and dedicate your life to this purpose?
I think, I want to say there's a couple things, but the real reason why I love what I do is when someone tells me that something has changed for them, right? It's being able to, I get messages all the time from people saying, oh my gosh, I bought my first place, or, I finally have my emergency fund, or, I'm dealing with this situation. And I know you talked about this and it actually helped me deal with my own, right? And so for me, it's just being able to provide some information that I wanted for myself when I was going through really difficult times. I mean, I still have my moments. And so I think I know how you called it passion, and it's something that I'm very passionate about, but I think it's also because we still don't have what we like. The way I look at the world, it's like, how can I leave it a better place, right? And I always think of what my grandparents did for me. My abuelita was always about kind of like, what will you do? What is it that you're going to impact in your community, within your family? What is it that you can bring to your comunidad? And for me, it was always trying to figure out, well, how do I balance that with being profitable, enjoying what I do? Because let's be real, if you're not making money at what you're doing, you shouldn't be doing it. Maybe not, right? But I think it's really important to know that for me, it was, I never saw myself. What I mean by that, in college, I was usually the only woman of color. It was mostly all men. Most of my classes are finance, right? And when I got to work as well in corporate America for about a decade, I was in there, and it was the same thing. I was usually the only woman, let alone the woman of color, and it was really frustrating not being able to see that representation. And even watching the news, reading books, like some of my favorite, it's one of my favorite moments was a couple years ago. 3 years ago, I got to meet one of my icons that I loved all her books. I read all her books in college, and I got to work with her. And I told her, I know you're not Latina, you're a black and brown person, but because you're a woman, it was really helpful to read your books because it made me think I can do it too. And so now when, I see women that have reached out to me when they start their businesses, when they're, doing what they're doing. It's so great that they're like, oh yeah, I found you a few years ago and it inspired me to do this. And I think that's so cool to be like, oh my gosh, I guess it is making a difference. And sometimes you don't know because yes, you can look at the numbers. I can look at, who's watching, who's viewing, who's, how many listeners we're getting. I understand that, but at the personal level really does make the difference when I get to go meet people at their conferences and people say what they've learned and what they've done. I think that's something, one of the the best feelings in the world. And I'm really fortunate that I get to do that. So, it's been a long journey, and it's been such a good journey that I've been able to do this for this many years. And I hope to do it for many more, because I think it'll never, unfortunately, it's not something that's going to happen overnight. And we're always going to have people coming into new chapters, right? It doesn't matter how old you're. When you're watching this, you could be in your 20s, your 40s, your 50s, getting ready for retirement. These are all new chapters, right? When you're graduating from college, that's a new chapter. If you're possibly getting married, that's a new chapter. If you're starting a business, that's a new chapter. There's always these new chapters that have to do with money. And if we're not talking about these taboo subjects, usually around money, how are we going to learn, right? And so, being vulnerable, being able to share what I've gone through, has helped other people, and it's helped me as well, because now I can look back and say, all right, I can get through this because I've gone through worse, or I've been here before. And I think, people are like, how is it you're not as freaking out with this recession? And I go, well, I've done things differently this time around as opposed to before. So that's why I'm not freaking out, right? I've learned from those mistakes. And at the same time, it's like, what can I do to improve for the next one as well? So I know it's a long answer for that, but it's just a deep question. And I'm sure I can tell you many more reasons why I love what I do. But I think that's really important to be able to be that representation.
Absolutely. Well, tonight is just the tip of the iceberg. You are always welcome here at the table at VodPod Media. This won't be the last time that we have you, and we welcome you back to San Antonio, Texas. The last time I seen you, you were here about 3 years ago making money moves with our homegirls. You all organized a phenomenal event. I think I showed up late, and I came to the panel, and I was like, man, I don't even know what I'm going to add here, but it was a great event. We got to give a couple shout outs. I want you to shout a couple of those panelists, the people that organized the event here on the ground. One other individual that I got to shout out that I know you know is Ramona Ortega, who's also leading in this space.
And, she's amazing.
Oh yeah, we got to get her on the show as well. But I shout out to her, salute her, because she's, been doing this for a long time. Incredible, insightful.
I love her work, and yes, a great shout out to her. I just recently worked with one of her events that she did at the Money Salon here in LA, and yeah, and she's one of those people that I think we met maybe my second year when I started doing this work, and it was great. I was like, oh my gosh, there's someone, she was in the East Coast in New York at the time. And so, I'm from LA, and like, oh my God, this is great to see that we're doing something. And the fact that she's done so much, seeing her on that Wall Street documentary on HBO, just seeing her really evolve. She just recently did the NASDAQ ringing of the bell, which is so incredibly cool. Like, I'm just like so proud of her. And I think that's the coolest part, is that, guess what? We start to build each other up, and we learn from each other. And we work together all the time for that reason. But also to Marisa from Mexi Moments. She has Girl Talk podcast, and she's the one that really hosted and put together this incredible panel that you were part of. And it was just that, talking about what is it that we're doing to not make just big money moves, but how is it that we're going to do the future, right? How is it that we're going to be making those right financial moves? Because in the end, it's what we do today that will make the difference tomorrow. And so, a great shout out to some just great Latina podcasters. And there's so many in Texas too, but hopefully I'll get to see you in person too, so we can do this properly in person. But thank you again for having me, and hopefully I'll get to be back soon.
Absolutely. We appreciate your time. I'm going to hit you with some lightning round questions in just a bit. I got you on a couple of surprises here, girl. Don't think you're getting out of that hot seat just yet. But shout out to everybody. Look, if you're watching this, if you just look, that man D Wayne just stepped in the building here at VodPod. I wish you could see what we got going on behind the scenes here. It's a little bit of everything. We're live tonight. If you're watching, go ahead. If you heard anything, what we're telling you, and Guideline giving you the panoramic view right now of everything that we got going on. We got D Wayne in the building. Hey, he's messing around with the camera view, so I don't know where you at, but we got a big audience here. We got a big crew here. Everyone comes through to VodPod Media on any given night, because you never know who's going to pop up. We got people from all four corners of the city here getting down. Phenomenal evening, phenomenal show. I'm going to hit you with some lightning round questions, because we got to let our people really know about Natalie. Okay, so here we go. Favorite breakfast taco?
Ooh, avocado and eggs.
Okay, I like it. Throw some papitas in there too. Ideal vacation?
El Salvador. I love going there. Okay. Just anywhere on the beach.
Okay. Coffee or tea?
I prefer coffee, but I have more tea just for health wise.
Okay, what type of tea you got?
Definitely, I love my ginger turmeric tea.
Nice. You mentioned Netflix and chilling over there. What you watching on Netflix? Or
I
what's
just
your
started, yeah,
entertainment, any streaming platform?
I just started watching Wednesday. It's so great, and she happens to be Latina, and I believe I heard it was the most watched Netflix show of all time and streamed all over the world. So it's pretty cool. But yeah,
Yep.
it's what I'm starting to watch now.
Yep. Shout out to Wednesday. If you're watching this, girl, you better give us a like. I'm telling you, we got legends in our community right now. If you've seen them on Netflix or you didn't, if you've seen them here at VodPod, if you heard them at a conference, you better support our people, y'all. We're the ones out here redefining the culture, uplifting the people, telling these stories. We're out here representing for previous generations and future generations. So I got to ask, Natalie, what's a hidden talent that none of us would guess?
That I have a
Yep.
hidden talent. I could dance. I danced for many years as far as ballet, modern, jazz, and yeah, it's not necessarily a hidden talent. I just don't necessarily show it. So maybe I'll do a few more moves in the future.
All right. What are you listening to?
Podcast wise, or just in general.
Yeah, let's go music and podcasts.
Music, I like deep house during the day because it keeps me going and it's just the vibe. But morning and afternoons, it's jazz. It has to be something that's just going to keep me calm, chill, and not deal with any additional anxiety. The recent podcast that I've been listening to, Money Confidential from Real Simple, I like that. And I think Stacking Benjamin is still one of my top favorite ones. But yeah, it's kind of fun. Everything about money, why not? And Brene Brown, I still love her podcast. So yeah, some fun stuff.
Okay, and quickly, are you allowed to talk about what you are? You have a award that you're up for, correct? Do you want to give that a quick plug?
Yeah, it's unexpected nomination for the Signal Awards. That today I got the notification that my episode that I did with the host of Money Confidential is Stephanie O'Connell Rodriguez. And we did this podcast episode back in June. And it was me talking about how to pay for your IVF, but dealing with, the fertility treatments and basically everything around financial and mental costs that comes with that. So we got nominated for the Best Advice to podcast. And I think we're in the running for number one. So people can definitely still vote till December 22nd. But that's huge for both of us because Latinas and the representation and especially in podcast world is still very, very little. So it's great to see that they're noticing what we're talking about.
Yep, and we're going to put the link in the comments here on the live stream where you can go and vote for this best episode for the advice. I understand it's in the advice section.
Yes, advice how to. Yep, and it's
Okay.
you could put Money Confidential.
All
It'll
right.
show up the three people within that category, the three podcasts. Mhm.
Great, great. What do you think is beyond this life?
Ooh, um, healing energy. I think we're all energy. You talked about money earlier being fake, and I agree. And it's another energy, right? It's beyond this life is just I think more healing energy. Whatever we don't get to finish here, it's in hopes that we get to do that in the next one. So I think that's beyond. I hope I answered it well.
That's good. Last two questions. How do you want to be remembered?
Ooh.
We're going deep in here,
I
Natalie. I
don't
got you off
know.
guard
Yeah,
with the
yeah.
Netflix and
I
chilling.
know this is a fast one too. I don't know how I want to be remembered. I, I just want to be remembered as a community leader, someone that did something worth towards our community.
All right, awesome. And the closing words, I will leave them to you with all the grace and thank you. If you got the praying emojis, I'm sending to you right now. We've got about a minute and a half. I'll let you get the closing words and then we'll close the show properly.
Oh, the closing words. I'll just tell you my favorite quote is we are ancestors' wildest dreams come true. So yeah, take advantage of that. My abuela would always say that. So make sure that you do the same and think about that often.
That's right. That's right. And I've also heard that one day our children are going to be the future ancestors for a whole nother generation. And so we're out here changing the trajectory, carving out a different path towards more justice, more fairness, more equality. You're at the forefront of that movement. So I got to thank you and salute you for your work. Shout out to you and your family. Many blessings to all that have watched tonight. Thank you for being supporters here at VodPod. Thank you for believing in it, because we could not be doing this work, right? We could just say, hey, you know what? I'm going to go do something else because nobody's listening. But we're here still telling these stories, fighting the good fight. So thank you, Natalie. Thank you, everybody that's been watching. We will see you folks next week right here at VodPod Media. We're here live every Tuesday night, 7 p.m. We love you and have a great night. Thank you.
Thank you.